Hi, my name is Rod Solar.
And I'm Laura Livesey.
And we're Livesey Solar with a mission to grow the practice and the life that you love.
We're really excited to be on the Trust Health podcast today, talking about the top reasons why professional healthcare practices fail on the telephone and why it can be catastrophic to the overall business. So I think maybe to start us off, we're gonna look at some of the myths and some of the anxieties around answering the telephone, around selling, that kind of thing. Rod Solar is a trainer. He's been doing it for 20 years, training healthcare practices, everyone from secretaries to receptionists, healthcare technicians, like optometrists, ophthalmologists, consultants, everyone under the sun, how to deal with patients. And one of the key areas that he focuses on a lot is helping the first line people who deal with people on the telephone. And so generally in practices, it's not always the secretary. It's really whoever is next to the phone. And so we're going to share with you why that may not be a good idea and some of the common pitfalls that happen when the phone isn't answered in that way. So I think the first thing we'll look at is ethics. I think ethics come up a lot. And maybe, Rod, you can give us a little bit of an understanding of where a misguided sense of why sales may be unethical can get in the way of actually helping patients on the telephone when they first inquire.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest, one of your own biggest enemies is yourself, in the sense that you frequently put barriers in front of yourself from being successful. I think that if you'd make the decision to go out into private practice, you can't pick up one end of the stick and not pick up the other. The other end of the stick implicitly means that you are in the business of selling services. Now, you might say, well, I don't want to go out there and I don't want to, be like a double glazing salesperson, or I don't want to push the stuff upon people that, may not want it. I don't want to lie, all these things going through people's heads. And I know this because I ask staff that I'm training and I go, what is the words, free association time. Let's get on the couch and be like Freud. What are the words that you associate with the word sales? And most of the time, when they get past telling me what they think I want to hear, they say things like pushy, they say things like lie, they say things like obnoxious, and all these negative connotations. And I think one of the biggest challenges that people have, not only yourself, but the people who are working for you, is their own reticence, their own resistance to laying out the value in what you offer and helping people get over their obstacles to get at what it is that they want. I mean, these patients are calling you and coming into your practices, not because they're lonely, not because they're bored, but because they really want something from you. And it's your job in private practice to help them get what they want. And that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, is what selling's all about.
So in essence, you're actually doing them a disservice if you don't provide them with the information that they're calling in for. And unfortunately, that tends to happen quite a lot, or more often than you might imagine. So let's turn now to who should answer the telephone. Yeah. I think that this is often kind of we'll just, whoever's around can pick it up. We'll leave it to the leftovers. So tell us a little bit about that and why you really should put some consideration into who's actually picking up the phone.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point there. I mean, usually what people have to do in order to answer the telephone is pass the A/B test, right? Which is like, are you alive? Yep. Are you breathing? Yep. Okay, please answer the phone. We got to go past that, right? We have to, like, if possible, and I would say it's ideal. If you're serious about your practice, you got to dedicate somebody to the phone, and you have to answer that phone, because we're not in the times where people are patient. Your prospective patients might be called patients, but they're very impatient. What they want to do is they want to get a solution to the problems fast, and especially millennials. Millennials, if that's your market base, they're not going to be interested in waiting for you to get back to them 2 or 3 days down the road once they've answered your voicemails. No, they want to be dealt with immediately. It's taken a lot of energy and courage for them to actually pick up the phone, because most millennials don't seem to even want to use the phone. They tend to have to when dealing with in this situation. And then there better be somebody on the phone who's receptive, trained, ready to go, and aiming to convert that patient into a consultation. If you don't have that in place, you are leaving heaps and heaps of money on the table. And I don't think that's why you got into practice in the first place.
Yeah, and I think this is a continuation of this, but maybe you can talk a little bit more. You mentioned that you need somebody dedicated. I mean, why can't you just have, maybe it is a part of their job description to answer the phone, and then they also say a medical secretary. I think that's quite common in private practice, where you have a secretary that does a whole host of things. So why doesn't that work?
Well, number one, they're busy. I mean, they have a job. The reason you employ them is to do work. And if they see the telephone as an interruption in what they do every day, then that's not good for you, right? They may have all the willingness to answer your phone, but if they're busy, chasing down bills or following up on other people who need to come in for aftercare appointments, then they're not going to be available and ready to answer the phone properly. A receptionist isn't the ideal choice either, because a receptionist also has a job to do. They're on the front line, ensuring that they are, speaking to your patients when they come and visit you. They don't have the attention span or time or resources to be able to sit with a person on the phone for 15 minutes, which is ideally how long it really should take, anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes for a proper phone call. How are they going to have an intimate and in-depth conversation about private matters with 20 people in the waiting room? It just doesn't work.
Okay. Yeah, and I think another one that I get all the time is I talk to consultants almost every day about their teams and sort of what's going right in the business, what's wrong, how are the metrics going, and I get asked all the time, or I should say I hear agonized questions about, I'm not sure that my receptionist, my secretary, whatever, can answer these questions. They don't seem ready for it. They don't seem up for it. They don't seem comfortable with sales, for example. So how do you kind of view that, and what kind of a person do you think should be doing this role?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I recently read a book by Simon Sinek. It's called Start With Why. And one of the things he says is that the goal of business is not to do business with anyone who has what you've got or who wants what you've got, but rather the goal of business is to do business with those who believe what you believe. And I find that quote immeasurably impactful. This also applies to employees. So if you don't have people on your team who believe what you believe, in other words, that it's a good thing to invite patients into a consultation, that it's a good thing to remove obstacles in their path, to make it easy to get them to take their next steps, that it's a good thing to follow up with patients and to really, really take heart in the numbers and to really feel like, every patient you earn is a patient that otherwise would go to someone else and not to your practice. If they don't feel strongly and passionate about what you offer, then they're in the wrong place and they shouldn't be answering the phone.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And what about infrastructure? I mean, a lot of practices don't have fancy phone systems and that sort of thing. What are the essential things that practices need to have set up to do this right?
Right. Well, I think any private practice needs to get rid of telephony. The idea of, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 3 for that. That's just a barrier in the way of having a conversation with a real human. So I think it's super important, and you can do it, and you need to differentiate yourself away from the chains by having a real human who takes the time to really and has the infrastructure available to them to make quick and easy bookings. So, I mean, one of the biggest things I notice is that, while, say you have somebody trained, number one, they don't have a private room in which they can answer phone calls. That's problem number one. So they feel like everybody's listening to them, and that's not a good environment in order to stimulate this kind of conversation. Secondly, they have computer systems that are so slow that they have to make the patient wait on the phone to do the most simple things, like to book the next available appointment. So when that happens, you just basically lose the momentum that you've worked so hard to create here, and you quite possibly may lose the booking.
Yeah. No, that's a common one. I think there's a lot of patients that are frustrated, especially by the telephony, the press 1, press 2, and not getting a live human and just disappearing. What about the methodology? I mean, in terms of how you handle the calls coming in. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, well, my people don't really want to go off of a script. They want to be themselves, what kind of like a process do you need to have in place to handle the calls?
First thing I'm going to say is that these calls cost money. If you're doing any marketing, then every single call, you need to take the number of calls that you receive, divided by the amount of money you spent on marketing this month, and that's how much your calls are worth. So it's absolutely essential to value these calls for what they are. So what we're talking about here is having a process that is worthy of one of the most fundamentally important aspects of your business. What this means is not simply sitting there and responding to patient questions. First of all, most patients, when they make a phone call to a clinic, will say, how much does it cost? Then the person on the phone who you employ will say, it costs this much. Then in 50% of the cases, they go, okay, well, thanks very much, moving forward. That's too much for me. And they hang up the phone. Now, in the other 15% of the cases, what they might do is they go, okay, that's interesting. I have more questions. So they might ask another question, and they must ask another question. And then they exhaust themselves of the questions that they have, and then off they go. And there's no call to action. There's no request to make an appointment. It basically what the person that you've employed to do this is doing is they're acting like a human version of a website FAQ. And that's, you need them to go further than that. What you need them to do is take control. You need them to decide, okay, this is a qualified patient that I would like to invite into my clinic. So now I'm going to take you, patient, through a series of questions in order for me to make a relationship with you, in order for me to excite you and provide value for you as a result of this phone call, and then invite you to a consultation once I deem it's appropriate for you to come in, because my time is very valuable, my doctor's time is very valuable, and I would like you to come in and see if you're suitable for treatment. So that's essentially the process that I teach. It has to be an active process where the person you have answering the phone is a leader. It's not a follower.
It's not about product knowledge, is it?
No. I mean, look, product knowledge is great, but the time to offer product knowledge is, you got to know enough to be able to answer some basic questions. But the key thing is that people aren't coming to see you for product knowledge. What you're doing on the phone is you're selling the appointment. Mm-hmm. And product knowledge is best discussed at the appointment by the professionals whose job it is to know that information.
Not when you're booking the appointment, but at the appointment.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think finally the issue of how do I reward people and how do I keep them accountable? What kind of accountability structures do you need in place? Because I never come across this before we work with clients. It's really something that's an afterthought, is I need to have these structures in place. So what would you recommend in terms of getting people happy and excited in their role and ready to perform at a high level?
Yeah, first of all, you got to hire the right people, and we've discussed that.
Yeah.
Second, you have to monitor what they do. Mm-hmm. And you have to set goals for them. I mean, how many practices out there are telling their people, well, here's what I expect very clearly, how many calls you'll likely receive and how many calls I want you to convert. Really. I mean, how many people are telling their employees, this is what I expect, and making it super clear and important enough that they monitor it every single day. So there's a spreadsheet or a piece of software out there that actually reports back a conversion rate every single day. I mean, I know about as maybe the number of practices I can say are doing that, or I can count them on my one hand. And it's such an important function. So tracking conversion rates is essential.
And just to be clear, you mean on an individual level.
On an individual level.
We see this in clinics with one person on the phone. And I think a lot of our listeners maybe have that. So we're not talking about a big company here. We're talking about doing this for whoever handles your phone calls. They're that important.
Absolutely. You also have to invest some training into them. I mean, like, you can't just expect somebody to learn from the other person who's who's been doing it improperly, or and most clinics don't even have a manual for this. They don't have a process. They don't teach people what to do. They just basically throw you on the phone and hope that you learn by osmosis. You need to have a training process, and you need to induct people in that training process so that they really understand what it is that you want them to do.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I mean, as Rod said earlier, the reason, again, for that, the reason that it makes sense is that every call is worth, depending on your industry or your speciality, anywhere from £100 to sometimes it takes up to £300+ to generate that phone call. So you just can't let anyone on it.
Yeah. And then most importantly, I would say if you want them to stay on the job, you've invested the money in hiring the right person, you've trained the right person, then you got to appreciate them. And it's super important to identify what ticks everybody's individual buttons and ensure that you are appreciating them on their level. Some people like gifts, money, that's a very, very clear incentive that's kind of the brute force incentive that some people think is useful. But beyond that, there are so many things that you can look at, words of appreciation, a public or a private pat on the back, spending time with people, establishing like regular events, outings, parties, in having them come to conferences. There's loads and loads of things, and I've only scratched the surface. I mean, I've got lists and lists and lists of these potential employee reward and recognition ideas that you need to systematize and ensure that you are delivering, because the last thing you want to do is promise some things and then not deliver them. So yeah, you got to treat your employees. Okay, this is going to be a bold thought, but you got to actually treat them better than you treat your patients. Wow. Yeah. You got to treat your employees better than you treat your patients. Why? Because you are expecting your employees to treat your patients well. And if you don't treat your employees as well or not better, they're not going to want to do that. They're not going to
hit the mark.
No.
Yeah. Thank you, Rod. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. I've really enjoyed talking through the pitfalls, I suppose, of answering the telephone. I'm Laura Livesey.
And I'm Rod Solar.
And as always, we want to hear from you. So why don't you now map out your telephone process? What are you doing on the phone calls? Which of these pitfalls do you think that you're falling into? Is it that you're not answering the phone appropriately? Do you have telephony? Are you not taking leadership and guiding people through the process? Where do you think that things are falling apart from you, and how can you do things better? So have a think about that. It's it's actually our step 2 of the 5-step process to grow a thriving clinic. You really need to have this step in place. And if you do get it right, you can essentially double your business. So it's a really, really essential step to have right in private healthcare in the UK.